Right, so the family of a former Zambian President Edgar Lungu is appealing a Pretoria High Court order instructing his repatriation for a state funeral. It follows an over 2-month-long battle between his family and the Zambian government. Lungu died in a South African hospital on the 5th of June. Well, family spokesperson, Mr. Makebi Zulu, joins us for more. Mr. Zulu, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I can imagine a lot to think about for the Lungu family. If you would perhaps just talk to us about what some of the deliberations really for the family have been since the ruling on Friday that saw that court ordering that the former Zambian president be repatriated back to Zambia.
Thank you very much, Naledi, for having me, and greetings to all the good people of South Africa. As regards the matter that was before court, the family thought it wise to appeal the judgment of the High Court for several reasons. We feel the court did not address the gravamen of the matter that was before it. And the court decided to look at the narrow side of a purported agreement which constituted of concessions by the government. And in its ruling, the court did mention to say that there was an agreement, and there being an agreement, they talked of the principle of pacta sunt servanda to the effect that parties must respect their agreement. However, having said that, they went to an extent of saying, giving orders that in fact do change the concessions that were reached by the family. So if the family and the government had agreed, for example, that the body would be repatriated by the family privately into Zambia, where he could be afforded a state funeral, the court gave an order to say, excluding the family from the process, saying that the sheriff would go to the undertaker, and the undertaker would hand over the body to the Zambian government, and the family are authorized to be present when this is being done, and gave power or the right to the government to repatriate the body. That is one end that constitutes a ground of appeal. But then there were also rights, the right to dignity that the family pleaded in their arguments. The court didn't address the question of the right to dignity. The court didn't address the question of the next of kin, who is entitled to the body. That is a very important question. And we felt the court erred when they said public interest overrides that of the family. And whose public interest, which public was the court dealing with? If the court was dealing with the Zambian public interest, what clothes them with the authority to deal with the Zambian system? When in the deliberations they said they wouldn't issue orders that would necessarily have an effect in Zambia because they had no jurisdiction to do so. And also in saying that the law that applies in Zambia is the one that they were going to apply, we felt the court did not go further to explain the circumstances under which those grounds would be applicable. There are quite a lot of cases within the South African system, and quite a lot of examples abound where the wishes of the family are paramount. And in this particular case, even if you're going to compare to the other presidents, as the state argued in this case, President Edgar Lungu did not die enjoying the benefits of a former president. He died as a private person because the state took away all those rights that ordinarily should have had. We presented evidence of President Edgar Lungu himself speaking to that fact. That evidence was not alluded to, expressing the wishes of President Edgar Lungu, or what should be construed to be his wishes. That was not alluded to. And we felt that perhaps if the court had gone to look at the evidence and not narrowly look at what was a purported agreement, which essentially were concessions, as it were, they would have arrived at a different decision, and that's the reason we have appealed.
Is there a concern, though, for the Lungu family that what this appeal would mean would be an even more drawn-out process, and would mean that it is more time that the former president of Zambia remains not being laid to rest. Surely that being a concern for the Lungu family. 2 months, more than 2 months already has passed since his passing, and he still has not been laid to rest. Is that surely an emotive point for the family?
See, the point for the family is just one, to give the former president a dignified send-off. What is perceived as a dignified send-off by the family is not the government bulldozing and being in charge of the manner the barrier is going to be, how the former president is going to be put to rest. That can't be the decision of the government. That is the decision of the family. So the family will fight to ensure that their rights are protected. And what culminates into a dignified send-off is achieved, and not necessarily what may be a mockery, where a person's right to life was threatened and possibly abrogated and not respected at all, then the very persons that are accused of having abrogated that right are the ones that are being put in charge of putting him to rest. The family does not perceive that to be a dignified send-off.
Of course.
So it is a dignified send-off that the family is looking at.
Of course, in the run-up to the ruling, what we saw last week was the argument that was being made by the legal representative for the Zambian government in the matter. The argument that they put on the table in the court was, by virtue of former President Lungu being again a former president of Zambia, that and that alone makes him, I suppose, means that he belongs to the state more so than he does to the family. Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but they speak about him as a former president belonging to the state. So if you will, we take a few steps back about what the family's concerns about what would happen if the state took over the remains of former President Lungu.
Firstly, that's legally wrong, and it's also morally wrong. A person holding the office of president does not cease to belong to the family. Here in South Africa, you had the case of President Nelson Mandela, President Botha. The family chose how they were going to lay him to rest. Merely because a person has held the office of president does not give the state rights that are over and above that of the family. And that position is what we intend to have the Superior Court clarify. There's no law in Zambia that gives a superior right over the body of a deceased person, notwithstanding the position that they may have held. That does not count for anything. In any event, even assuming that it was that way, the former President Edgar Lungu died as a private person with all the rights of the former president stripped from him because the state said you have gone back into active politics, therefore you are not entitled to these benefits. So you can't then thrust them upon him in his death, purport to respect him in his death when you vilified him during his lifetime, to an extent of refusing him to access medical services and not being there the whole time. So that vitiates the concept of public interest, because it is not the public that is taking care of his bills. It is not the public that is offering him any security. By that I mean he's not drawing from the coffers of the state for the sustenance of his life, because all those benefits were taken away. And the state came and argued to say, upon his death, all those things come back. That's a mockery to the family, because they needed them more when he was alive than in his death. So that is what we are presenting before the court. And we are hopeful that the court will look at it in the light that we will present it, putting all these facts on the table.
And the timeframes that you're hoping to have all of this settled by, ideally, for the family?
Ideally, the family is more concerned with what is going to give him a dignified
Okay.
burial.
Yeah.
Yes, that is the main concern. If the court is going to take longer, the family is willing to wait until he is given what is deemed a dignified burial, not a mockery, not a judgment that takes away the rights of the family. That right to dignity that has been violated, that must be respected. And the family will look for the dignity of both themselves and the dignity of President Edgar Lungu.
Yeah, and when you talk about a dignified funeral, this is, of course, the closing question, just to talk about what that would look like for the Lungu family. I think if we are to see, for instance, the family succeeding in having former President Lungu buried in South Africa, what that would look like, and what, again, we need to talk about the role of South African, the South African state needs to play in that funeral, if at all.
You see, what constitutes a dignified burial is anything that will not be a mockery to the legacy of Edgar Lungu or a mockery to the family of President Edgar Lungu. In the last event, we had intended to bury here, and we had intended to bury privately. And I know that the wishes of the family is to bury privately. If at all invitations are to be extended, they will be extended to necessary people that ought to be there. And of course, with all respects being given to the South African government for having accorded him even that opportunity to be able to access medical attention here in South Africa. But if that is going to disturb the diplomatic relations, then the family will proceed in a very private manner, because we respect the will of the South African people, and we wouldn't want to antagonize the relations between South Africa and Zambia. The death in this particular case and the burial being a private issue, and knowing that the remains of a deceased belong to the family, would like that to be respected, with permutations only as shall be allowed by the family.
Yeah. Well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. We'll be watching the process as it unfolds in the courts as well very closely. Thank you so much for giving us the perspective of the Lungu family. Mr. Makebi Zulu there, the spokesperson for the Lungu family, as we see them having filed papers for leave to appeal that High Court judgment that essentially ordered that the former president of Zambia's remains be repatriated back to Zambia.